Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Hacking Your Leadership author podcast for the leadership series here. We are so excited. I know we've had some amazing content and dialogue with some not just tremendous leadership book authors, but tremendous leaders themselves who have done some really great work with their teams in their industries and have taken the time to really share their thoughts and perspectives with the world. So today, I'm super excited to introduce you to Elizabeth Bieniek, an innovator who led the team developing WebEx Hologram. Elizabeth's the author of Cake on Tuesday, which explores her approach to fostering innovation through culture building and leadership. So, Elizabeth, welcome to the show, and say hi to our audience here.
Thank you, Lorenzo. I'm super excited to be here. Super excited to talk about this. This is awesome.
I love it. Well, let's get started right away. Cake on Tuesday. You got me with the title. I love marketing. I love ideas. I love the ones that go, what? How does this work? So walk me through the title first and foremost. How did we get there for the title of this book?
Sure. And I'll give a shout out to my publisher for giving me some leeway on this one because we went back and forth a lot.
Well, I love it. I love it.
Thank you. I really wanted something that stood out and was not traditional because everything about this book, everything about myself, everything about my leadership journey is different and non-traditional. So I needed a title that reflected that. And there's a chapter in the book called Have Cake on Tuesday. And it came from one particular stretch on the project that the book is about where things were just a little slow, a little bit of that slog, we had to make our own magic at that season. And I was having a conversation with my ops lead at the time, who was fantastic, about how do we interject some fun, some levity? How do we create something to rally the team around when there's not a major milestone to do that? And she had this great idea of creating a Wheel of Fortune style Wheel of Winning and put everybody's name on it that was on our team. At the end of our staff meetings, we'd spin it. And if it landed on your name, Lorenzo today, all right, you're getting a cake this week. And a cake would show up at your door 2 days later for no reason, no questions asked. And it was, our staff meetings were on Tuesdays, so that's where Cake on Tuesday came from. It was just a way to really celebrate the journey.
I love that. And I love, we talk a lot about kind of moving people from the core. Like, how do you create that moment where like something is different, something is exciting, something is unique when you're building teams and culture, and it becomes a part of what that culture is. And I love that approach because I think sometimes it's really easy for us to trip and fall and get caught up in the day-to-day and the minutia of the work. And then
100%.
A lot of times when you have great people and great leaders, we're so hyper-focused on the work. That we need that silliness or that thing or that something that's not like a part of the normalcy that kind of breaks us out of that shell. So I absolutely love that. And then what, as you kind of followed up on that over time, you know what I mean? Like what was were there any ideas or any elements of impact to the business or to the team that kind of like grew legs from that initial approach?
Oh, I think for sure. I think every time you're trying to do something hard, something different, it's almost more important than that season when you're working hard, you have to play hard. They have to go in parallel, I think. So if you're working on a project and you're asking a lot of your team and you're trying to go through uncharted waters, you're doing long days, you're dealing with tough problems, if you're not injecting some fun into that, you can burn out really, really quick. And I think that's something you can see anytime you're working specifically on a bleeding edge tech where you don't have a guidebook to fall back on. You're really figuring it out as you go. So I do think in those scenarios, I mean, you see this in all different industries, paramedics and firefighters, like usually some of the funniest people that you'll find because they're great at just balancing things out. When you're dealing with major problems, you need major humor to keep you sane and grounded. So I think that did set the tone with our team. I think culture is something that's incredibly important and you really have to work to build that right from the get-go. And once you have that, you have to foster it. You have to keep feeding it. It's not a set it and forget it kind of a thing. So having that level of fun and making sure that was important. It wasn't an afterthought. It was part of doing work. I want to be happy to go to work. I want to be happy to show up and enjoy this team. And if I'm not having a good time, then you're probably not having a good time and we're not going to want to keep doing this. So if we need to be elbow to elbow all the time, like let's enjoy the journey.
Yeah, I love that. I think I've had the honor and pleasure of working with some really high performing teams, and I think that the one thing that always pops out of my head about that is that we had fun. We worked really
Yeah.
hard, but we had a lot of fun, and that's kind of what made it something that was enjoyable. Even in
Yeah.
the hard times or the times that we're really, really focused. So I love that. I want to jump into the book a little bit here, specifically on some things that you talk about. And one of the things that really stuck out to me right away was kind of the power of disagreement. You have no idea how much I love that. I'm a sucker for really great, healthy debates, and for me, I get really nervous when it gets quiet. When my leaders, when my teams aren't kind of like grinding against each other a little bit and having some disagreement. That's when I get nervous because then I feel like we've given up, like nobody cares anymore. And I know
Right.
it's not the case, but that's how I feel. So walk me through a little bit about that. What do you mean when you say the power of disagreement, and why that's so important to fostering not just innovation but great culture, as you were just talking about?
Yeah, I opened that chapter with the Monty Python quote of "Good morning, I'd like to have an argument" from that great skit they have. Just it's
Yeah.
a whole skit about arguments. Disagreement is something I think it gets a bad rap. It at times in certain areas, certain cultures. I worked with a very global team, and I think different groups of people can look at disagreement in different ways. And sometimes we look at it very negatively of we need to be aligned and all get along. But I think there's a very fine distinction between we need to be working together in unison towards the same mission and moving together as one towards that. But that doesn't mean we're going to agree 100% on everything. And if we do, another quote I use in that chapter is something I heard when I was a kid that always stuck with me, that if two people always agree, one of them is not necessary. And that was very impactful to me, just thinking that's kind of a good point. So if you have a team of people that are just yes ma'am, yes sirs kind of thing, and nobody's bringing up dissenting opinions, every idea that gets brought up is going to remain as shallow as it first was. You need those disagreements and dissenting opinions to help make it better. And if you have an environment that fosters that and welcomes that, and that's something you have to do that in action, not just in words. And there's a lot of times we'll say like, oh, any idea is welcome, and then somebody brings up an idea and it gets shot down. So you have to make sure your culture and your behavior backs that up. But if you do have that environment where you want the dissenting opinions, like help make my idea better. That's how you can go fast. I think specifically in innovation, where you are again building the proverbial airplane as you're flying it. You can't wait till you have all the research and all the facts and have it all figured out. And I've got it vetted. I've got my market validation. You're going to be too late to the game. So you're moving very quickly with minimal data, and so you really rely on other people to poke holes. And hopefully, the holes are getting poked by your friends and your colleagues before it goes out there in the market and flops. So you want the people that are going to bring up those conflicting opinions, because the end goal should be what I'm bringing to the table, what you're bringing to the table, what all these other people are bringing to the table. We've all got a piece of that puzzle, but when we put it together, the sum of all the parts is greater. That's what you're going for.
Yeah, I love that. And I think one of the questions that we get a lot on the podcast is like, how do you create the space for that to actually happen? Like as the leader of a team, and you're in a meeting, or you're in an ideation session, or you're in a blue sky meeting, whatever we want to call it. Like you have people, they know that there is, that we have to kind of push up once against one another, maybe shoot holes in the plan. But how do you make that happen in a healthy way, especially initially? Like again, once you have the team down that path and they all understand the value that they each bring, and that this is an expectation that we have to do to make sure the best idea wins. What do those first maybe couple of meetings look like, or what are you doing to open up the space to make it okay for us to have these differing opinions, and not necessarily take it personal?
Yeah. I think there's a couple things. One is it's important to set guidelines and boundaries. I think I refer to this a lot. I have three small kids, 10 and under, and I say that leading is a lot like parenting. Like you have to have firm guidelines and boundaries, because your kids are going to push for those and find those. Where's my end? How far can I go? But then within those boundaries, you need to give freedom. And I 100% think it's the same when you're leading a team. You need to, as a leader, you need to set boundaries. You need to be clear about that. It can't just be, hey, we're going to have an open dialogue and debate about anything and everything, and who cares what the outcome is, and we can talk for 17 hours. You need some sort of parameter, because there's some goal you're trying to achieve. Like we need to make a decision, we need to build something, we need to move forward. When you were teeing up the question, it gave me a flashback to my first management job 20 some odd years ago. And I remember having this conversation with my team back then, they asked me what my management style was. And this was my first management job. So I'm like, well, I'm going to figure it out as I go. But I had made the answer of, I'm a collaborative leader until the clock runs out, and then I'm command and control. And I think that worked really well. And that's something I have continued to use throughout my career of I want to hear up front all those opinions. And your question of how do you make room for that? I think if you say it, I'm big on say what you mean and mean what you say. So when you have those first meetings, when you're still figuring out what a project is going to look like, be very crystal clear on here's the end goal of what we're trying to do. This is what we're trying to build, where we're trying to go, what we need to accomplish. Here are the known parameters that we have: time, budget, money, resources, whatever the case is. But then within that, say, now we got to figure out how we're going to get there. How are we getting from A to B? Thoughts, ideas, and open it up. And you can throw something out as a first idea. Just be careful you don't throw that out with the feeling that, oh, I can't poke holes at that because that's the boss's idea and I can't go against that. So you definitely have to poke holes at your own idea and throw out and say, this is where it's impartial. This is where I'm getting stuck in my own mental process. Like, this is a problem. What do you guys think? How can we do this better? What can we add to it? And I think, again, if you back that up with behavior, you don't shoot down people's ideas. You don't call somebody out in a room. You don't make somebody feel stupid in front of a crowd of their peers. So you have to back it up with behavior. But once you start having some meeting like that, you get some really great dialogue and collaboration, and people build on each other's ideas. But then when you start running out the clock, then all right, great. It was awesome to hear all those different opinions. There's a lot of different approaches we do. We can't do all of them right now. Let's do this. And then you can throw that out and you can get feedback on that. Like, any thoughts, feedback on that approach. But the end of the day, you do have to make a decision. The buck has to stop with somebody. So collaborative up until a point, and then command and control.
Yeah, I love that. Collaborative until the clock runs out. I'm writing that down. I love that's such a great point there. It's phenomenal. And I also have two young daughters that are in second and third grade.
Nice.
So we have an ongoing joke with the Hacking Your Leadership podcast. It's like people have made bingo cards about the things that we kind of always talk about, and like the parental reference is one of those things. We do it so often because it's so true. There's so many things
Can't
there.
get away from it.
Yeah, it is what we're living it. Yeah, like we're living like this is exactly what leadership is, right? I think it's so great. So I do want to take a quick break to hear from a word from our sponsors, but when we get back, I'm going to ask Elizabeth about going outside. And I love this because it made me think immediately about some of my childhood and some of the elements here, along with a meeting that I just attended around sportsmanship for my daughter who is about to start playing basketball. So we'll be right back with Elizabeth after these messages. All right, we are back here on the second half of this show with Elizabeth, and we want to talk about going outside. You mentioned this as a childhood mantra. I saw this term, and I immediately thought of like me taking my bike to the big field to play with all the kids, and there were no parents around, and it was a lot of like, we had to figure out, number one, what we were going to do to have fun and not get in trouble. And then number two, whatever we were going to play, a lot of times we had to make up the rules and make adjustments. But there was so much just joy, and looking back on it, I think innovation and courage and confidence and all these things that came with it. So I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into this, just around going outside as a metaphor for you. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think of my mom when I was a kid and how many times she said that. I think I grew up in the geography and era where the answer to everything was just go outside.
Right.
I grew up in rural upstate New York, just outside of Albany. I lived on a just shy of 40-acre small farm for our own sustenance and whatnot. And it was all woods. It's all woodland back there. And it was, anytime we weren't in school or occupied in some way helping with the farm, there was no such thing as, oh, I'm bored. Can I play Mario? Can I do whatever? I was like, no, go outside. Come back when it's dark. I'll call you when it's dinner.
Right.
And I spent a huge amount of my childhood outside just exploring and dealing with nature. and wandering through those 38 acres, I think it was. And I have a topic that I say the value of poking things with sticks. And a lot of that is based on those same stories and remembrances of upstate New York is pretty wet in the spring. So you end up at just everything's mud. And I remember there was this little stream that ran through our, the woods in our backyard that if you poked it a certain way, move some rocks around, move some leaves around, you could actually make it run a fair amount. But otherwise, it would just get a little stagnant and get filled up. And so I spent so much of my time just outside playing around with stuff like that. And like, hey, if I divert the water path here, what does this do? And like, oh, let me just make a mud puddle over here. And like, I find a critter and stick it in there. So much is just exploration. And I think because of having that ingrained in me as a kid, it's something I still, well, I tell my kids to do it all the time too, just go outside. But I think it's something I use more metaphorically when I get stuck with something. Anytime you get caught up in your own thinking, trying to solve a problem, really trying to look at things from a different angle, just physically taking a break and going outside. We are creatures that were designed to be in nature. We weren't designed to be in these little cubicle boxes. And I think that's very stifling on your creativity and your perspective when you have a literal four walls closing in on you. So the ability to just get out of your environment figuratively and literally and allow yourself the luxury of a different perspective, I think that's really what helps thinking, problem solving, inspiration, innovation, ideation. It's amazing for that. So when I was going through the process of writing the book, I kept hearing, I think, my mom's voice talking to me from heaven of like, just go outside. When I get stuck, like, go outside. And so that theme is recurrent throughout the book because it is just a huge metaphor for problem solving in my life.
Yeah, I love that, and that resonates with me quite a bit. And I think it's such an important thing. It's like the actual sense of getting stuck. It's a real thing, and it happens quite often. And many times we have to change the environment, change something that's going on to kind of break ourselves out of that. And I just love the idea of just kind of like get out there and go poke the mud with a stick, like just go do something that is going to just have you go experience things in a different way and then bring that back together. So I love that metaphor for sure. In the book you have 5 parts, and I want to talk about each of them. The first one, starting, is hard. I think it's such a great call out there, and there's something in there that stood out to me around being disagreeable. You talk about going outside of your comfort zone, finding uniqueness and embracing simplicity, but being disagreeable. I read that and I'm like, it's such a great call, but I think that sometimes people may not, it's one of those words that when you read it, you kind of project your own definition onto it.
Yeah.
Right. Versus like what you mean. So I'd love for you to maybe talk a little bit about that. What do you mean when you say being disagreeable?
Yeah, I think looking at it in the context of starting versus how we were talking about it earlier in the podcast, but looking at it in the context purely of starting, it is related to go outside. And I actually, I'll be honest, my drafts of Cake on Tuesday, I flip-flopped those chapters a few times of which one should I start with? And I ended up starting with be disagreeable because the whole first section that is about starting, I felt like that was the most important thing. And it came from, I start out the book with a story, having a chat with my former manager of, it was very much like that, Monty Python. Good morning, I'd like to have an argument. And part of it is just me being a native New Yorker. I'm like, let's
go.
Poke things and let's go. Let's start. And he's based in California, and we like to have that coastal conflict, I think. And we were having a coffee one morning, and he was a VP in our department, oversaw several different groups. And I was just in one small facet of that. At the time, I was working on business relationships and strategic relationships. He had a separate group that was working on strategy. And I was not really involved in that other than tangentially. We do some long range planning. I might have the relationship angles to it, but I wasn't really involved in corporate strategy at all. He had a great leader that ran it and the whole process and all that. But I was just feeling confrontational that morning. I decided to give him a hard time over coffee. And we were in the process of doing this long range strategic plan. And I'm like, why do we call it a long range strategic plan? You're only looking 3 years out, and you're only looking internally at adjacent technologies. That's not long range, and it's not strategic. Why do we call it that? And he was very, very patient. Very kind, very patient. Right. So he put up with all my shenanigans. But I think that morning he just kind of took the approach of like calling my bluff, if you will, of all right, what should we do? If you think you could do a better long range strategic plan, show me. Do it. And he gave me some leeway to go do that. So I decided to take that. Give me an inch, I'll take a mile. So I ran with that. And that led to going outside. I spent a lot of time going external to our company, going to every incubator, accelerator, startup conference, everything I could go to, and trying to figure out what's on the horizon in this technology space. Like, what is some emerging tech that could really disrupt our current business model? What's out there? And that one thing led to another. And a lot of that was the project behind Cake on Tuesday. But it started with being disagreeable, and I wanted to start with that in the whole concept of how do you start? Starting is hard, because a lot of times it's simply looking at things from a different perspective. It's having that contrary view, that contrary approach. And so you mentioned that you end up doing parenting references, so I'm going to throw one in. I feel like you opened the door on that one, so it's fair game. So you're familiar with the Chick-fil-A logo? It's like the little chicken head with the little rooster with the comb on the top of it. Yep. My son, when he was, I don't know, maybe 5 at the time, we were driving by one of those restaurants, and he saw the sign. He's like, "Oh, that's that restaurant, the one with the foot on the sign." And I'm like, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Yeah. And if you look at it in the mind of a 5-year-old, it kind of looks like a foot. And so that's just, there's so much about having kids. It just immediately, they don't have the preconceived notions. They don't have the bias. They don't have all this baggage of this is how I'm supposed to look at it, like an iconic drawing of a chicken head, and like it looks like a foot. So sometimes when you look at things from a different perspective and you have that disagreeable thing, it might be like, look, this is your great strategic plan because it's the same thing you've done for 15 years, but I'm looking at it from this old side angle and it doesn't look that good to me. So I think being willing to have those contrary opinions and bring them up. I was maybe being a little bit of a jerk with my boss at the time, but bringing him up in a point of like, how do we make this better together? I think when it comes from that perspective of can we do something different for both of our benefits, then it's usually pretty well received.
Yeah, I love that. It's funny because I tend to reference the idea of like the curiosity of a 7-year-old, right? Also lived experience. Like, what's that? What does that do? How did that happen? What's that over there?
Why?
And it's, why? And you like, for a minute, it's annoying. But when you apply it in the workplace, you're like, wait a minute, like, why do we do that? And why is it that way? And whenever I bring on a new leader to a team, it's exactly what I ask them to go do. I'm like, ask all of the questions and just keep asking why. And I was like, and if we can't explain it in like less than a minute, then we probably don't actually know. And if you ever get the answer, well, that's the way that we've always done it. Hit the timeout button, right? And let's break it right now, right? Like, yeah, those are the things that we have to do. So I love that. That's so great. In the second part, in Set Your Idea in Motion, you talk about strategic hiring. Like that really being a necessity. And I want to just like pause there for a second because I think that I've done a lot of research, a lot of dialogue. I have spoken with a lot of recruiters around hiring and the importance of it. But what does that look like when you're thinking about that in your own lens of like strategic hiring? What do you mean by that? And who are you hiring to build the team in a positive way?
Yeah, it's hard to hire people, but it's even harder to offload people if you get the wrong people.
Yes, exactly. Yep,
taking that extra time and care up front is really, really important. And a lot of this goes down to what is your core culture? What is it you're trying to build or do or accomplish? What is that mission or North Star? And if you're clear on that, the rest of it is less important. You want somebody that can jump in and really get excited about and jazzed about that long-term goal and fit with the rest of it, but you don't need necessarily the nitty-gritty details of did you do this exact same thing at this in a different environment or the same environment at a competitor or something like that. I think a lot of times we get hung up on this I want a proven entity, so I'm only going to hire somebody based on what they've done. And if somebody's applying for a job, it's because they want to do something different. So I think when you approach that from, okay, yes, I need some level of validation of what have you done, but what do you want to do? What are you excited about? What gets you jazzed about coming to work? What sets your soul on fire? Like, what do you dread or love or hate or, oh, let's get into it. And I think when you have those conversations, you get to know people a little bit better and understand how they might plug into your environment. I have what I would say is maybe non-traditional interview practices. I mean, I have to adhere to HR guidelines. I'm not doing anything crazy. I'm not going bungee jumping or something. But I would have usually different questions that I would ask. I've had several people go through an interview with me and say, oh, nobody's ever asked me that before. But some of the questions are, well, actually, it's one kind of like what you just said. I went on hiring blitz for a while because we're trying to staff up at one particular time on this project, and I had several open recs at once. And you'd be coming into a team that was tasked with the charter of corporate innovation. And that was one of the things I would ask people. I'm like, tell me what you think corporate innovation is, like you're talking to your 8-year-old nephew. And just seeing how they would, because it's so easy when you get into these fancy schmancy fields to be like, use all the acronyms and buzzwords. Like, that has no meaning. Like, talk to me like a real person. Mm-hmm. And I always found that like your 8-year-old niece or nephew is kind of a good, because 8's a fun age. Like, they get a lot at 8. Yeah. So how do you explain it in those terms? And I usually find people they'd have to think on the fly for that. You have to really stop and think. I can't rely on buzzwords and industry acronyms and all. I can't use any of that. That has no validity to an 8-year-old. So how do I actually break it down to nuts and bolts and explain the concept behind it? And I feel like that was always a good indicator of how you're going to deal with ambiguous situations and working with new stuff like innovation. I'm very big on panel interviews and case study interviews, and preferably both together. I have a downloadable on my website about hiring for innovation. And I talk about, this is the process I use, and this is why I liked it and why I think it worked, because you get to see how case studies are great to see how people think, and panel interviews are great to see how they would work in the dynamics of your team. It's like a mini experiment. And then it's fun too to just throw somebody into something that don't know what they're expecting, and you're more likely to get an honest reaction if it's not too scripted. I was hiring a biz dev person at one point, and I gave them the interview question of, you're gonna present to a panel, and they want you to make a pitch. You got 15 minutes to make a pitch, and then we'll ask questions. But your pitch is supposed to be about pitch me a merger of any 2 companies. That was it. I gave no further direction. They would ask for more. You get nothing else. Just pitch me a merger of any 2 companies. And people came with all sorts of things. Some things would be very relevant to the business we were in the space and be a logical thing. Somebody pitched like dog treats in an ice cream shop or something. Anyway, you could get all sorts of interesting things. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter what they pitched. What I wanted to know is, how do you think about it? And how do you present an idea? And how do you handle and field questions in a panel? And I think when you are looking at hiring, getting to understand, 1, what really drives and motivates somebody, and 2, how they think and how they approach problems and how they're going to approach ambiguity and crazy questions. Those 2 things together can give you a pretty good insight of how they're going to work and jive with your team and towards your mission.
I love that. I think I'm very familiar and very similar approaches to panel interviews, and then kind of the non-traditional questions. Of course, we're going to ask the ones that we need to ask, but there's always follow-ups that you can do that maybe give you a little bit more of an insight into who the person is, how they see the world, how they define success for themselves, things like that. I think are great. And I probably would have pitched you a Chick-fil-A in a shoe store.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I would have gone with
I'm
that.
into it.
It's
I'm
a
into
foot,
it. There, I got the foot logo.
Right? Exactly.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. We're going all in. Yeah. I love that. So I know the third part of the book, you talk about adding oil and reducing friction. And then the fourth part, you talk about leading through the barren middle. And you specifically speak about shielding and protecting the team. And I love that language because I know what it means to me. And I also know that sometimes this is one of those examples where it's like, it can be overused. People are like, we have to protect the team. And I'm like, well, protect them from what? Like, is there a lion on the loose? Like, what are we protecting them from? Right. Or are we talking about like keeping them focused and doing the work? Like what are the, what do those things mean? But I'd love to dive into that a little bit deeper, just around when you say shielding to protect the team, what does that mean to you? And can you give an example of maybe how you have brought that to life?
Sure. For me, like I said, it was very important to get the right people on the team and put them through the gauntlet to get there. But once that was done, and once we'd established parameters, and here's the sandbox you can play in, but you can do whatever you want in that sandbox, then allowing them to do that was very important. So the shielding and protecting, I use the analogy of an umbrella and a shield a lot, because an umbrella being, at the time I was working for a large organization, we were basically trying to run a small stealth startup inside of a big tech company. And there are certain things that come with a large organization and the proverbial things roll downhill. So the idea of a umbrella was, I'm going to protect you from all that corporate noise and the forms you got to fill out and the check boxes you got to do and the analyst reports here and the make sure you're getting your funding pitch there and all those kinds of things. As much as possible, I would protect my team from that. I'm like, you don't need to worry about that. You just do you. And then the shield is protecting from the sides. There's all that stuff that comes up with just, I went to so-and-so in this department and I couldn't get this because we're outside of the normal practice and they need a special approval from this, or this group won't sign off on this for that reason, or these people want to know what we're doing and they're not part of the NDA, or what. There's just stuff. There's red tape and there's back and forth. And how do you protect them from that? I was very big on streamlining as much as possible. Have as few mandatory meetings as possible. Have as few mandatory forms as much as possible. And this probably came, honestly, from I used to work in ops a long time ago, and I was an ops manager for an organization that when I inherited that role, kind of a interesting, inherited is probably the best way I could say. When I inherited that role, there were certain practices in place, and I knew these VPGMs that I work with, they dreaded this one monthly ops like, you send me this form and I gotta fill it out and it's got hieroglyphics and I hate doing it. And so when I first took over that job, I sat down with each of the VPs that was responsible for their thing and I said, look, this is the information I need. I will take it in whatever way or format is easiest for you. Do you want me to call you? We have a 20-minute chat. Do you want me to send it to somebody on your team? They'll fill it out for you. Do you want to attach it to the leg of a carrier pigeon and send it to me on a napkin? I don't care. I just need the information. I'll make sure it gets into all the forms and the right check boxes are ticked and all that. But you have a business to run. You don't need to decipher this. I just need to know what's in your head. And that worked really well in that scenario, in that my approach was different with each VP that I work with, because you're trying to meet them in the style that they're working in. But I felt I applied that with my team as well, because you're shielding people from the noise. You're shielding people from the red tape. You're shielding people from all the things, the extra, the other as needed, that's bogging them down from actually being themselves and doing their core competency. So shielding is protecting them from all that, whether it's coming from tops down, from the side, or just general paperwork.
Yeah, no, I love it. That's exactly kind of what I think as well. Is kind of like for me, it was about helping them to stay focused and with positive energy, and not having to deal with like hurdles and distractions that can come from anywhere, from every direction, and that type of thing. I
remember one of my engineers on the team saying he needed a certain specific type of equipment, and it came saying like, you could get it from these couple of vendors, but it looks like it's out of stock from here, and then this price point I don't think we can get. We have to import it from another. I'm like, why are you looking at that? Just tell me what you need. I'm like, right. Well, I need these specifications. Great. When do you need it by? Well, I really need it by next week. Okay, super. You'll have it. And then I work with, why are you spending all this time figuring out, you're not a shipping logistics person. I have somebody who's really good at shipping logistics. Let me work with them on that. So I think, allowing people to shine where they shine and step back from the areas that are not their core competencies, you allow people to have a lot more productivity. It's also a great way to get way more performance out of your team. Absolutely, because you allow them to 10x in the thing they're good at and not waste their time on stuff that they struggle with.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that. And then the final part, insights from the review mirror. We're big fans of reflection and considering a lot of things that we've learned. And I love that you talk about like the value from every experience. You know, we share a lot around just the once you kind of click into that mode of realizing that you're gaining development, you're gaining training, you're gaining experience over time of doing the work and opening up to new perspectives. I think that takes away sometimes our hyper focus on things like titles, promotions, the next job, and this like just realizing that those things are going to continue to happen so long as you're applying yourself to the work. And then you talk about gratitude and joy and problem solving. So I'd love to just kind of as you thought about that last part there, of all those things, if you said, hey, facing rejection, finding mentors, maintaining self-preservation, long game, and then the deriving value piece, like which one of those things for you is like, this is the biggest thing for me that I think has the most relevancy and impact, of the collection of all of them?
I think the finding joy in the journey probably encompasses all of it, because that includes the taking time to reflect, taking your learnings and applying those, making sure you're enjoying everything that you went through to some extent. I think this is probably my own coping mechanism at some point. Of if you look at my career progression, it kind of does like one of these things. It's not like it's a nice clear line, and I think early on in my career, I had to come up with a story of like, why are you trying to pursue this area or this job? And looking at each of the roles I had and the things that I had done, what I was good at and what I liked to do, I did come up with a story of these can look at first glance like completely separate things. But when you think about it, I learned this skill here and then I was able to build on that and learn this skill here and build on that and learn this, even though the things looked all over the place. And so I think that very last chapter of the book, all experiences are useful if you learn from them, is kind of the best way to capture that of find joy in all of that and pull out the useful nuggets and discard the rest, because experiences are never going to go exactly according to plan, and what's logical to you might not be logical to somebody else. But if it works for your long-term journey and you're learning one bit of information from that, awesome. That's a step forward.
I love that. Well, thank you again, Elizabeth, for an amazing conversation. We're going to continue this dialogue in our Pillars and Pitfalls series on lionsguide.com. But before we wrap up, I'd love for you to just share with the audience, maybe social media. Where can they find you? Where would you like them to go to purchase the book and things like that?
Sure. ElizabethBieniek.com is my website. You can find me on LinkedIn, Elizabeth Bieniek. There's not that many of us. You'll find me out there. And then I'm also on Instagram and X at Cake on Tuesday. My book is titled Cake at Tuesday, 25 Lessons to Unlock Corporate Innovation. You can buy it Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, pretty much anywhere you can get a book.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Elizabeth Bieniek. It's been an amazing conversation. We'll have all of the links and everything in the episode notes for anyone who wants to get there quickly and check it all out and support some amazing leadership content. Thank you all, and we'll talk to you all next time.